Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for holding today's hearing. And I want to welcome all the witnesses that are here today from the Department of the Army and the Corps of Engineers for coming today. You know, over the years, the Corps has distinguished itself for addressing many of the nation's water-related challenges, constructing and maintaining navigation corridors along our coastlines and our inland waterways, to providing critical flood risk reduction, actually, to communities both large and small, to restoring many of our nation's treasured natural resources. The Corps has earned its reputation as the premier water resources agency to the federal government. Yet in recent years, we have seen this role diminished as the federal assistance to the Corps has waned, where once the Corps' ability to help communities was limited only by its creativity in solving complex water resources challenges. Today, the Corps' presence is significantly limited due to a lack of available resources. Fairly or unfairly, today's Corps is often criticized as being slow and expensive. However, as I pointed out, a significant amount of the blame for these criticisms, while some on the Corps, much of it falls on squarely at the feet of the administration and the Congress for failing to provide you with the resources necessary to help our communities address their local water resources challenges. For example, year after year, presidential budgets for the Corps have been reduced to a point where the Corps cannot efficiently fund critical projects and studies to completion. As a former chief of engineers, Robert Flowers once candidly admitted, when the Corps has not provided efficient and regular funding for Corps studies and projects, projects cost more to complete and take longer for their benefits to be realized. I'm not sure how the President expected Congress to react to his presidential budget requests for the Corps for fiscal year 2018. This was from a presidential candidate that campaigned on the promise of reinvesting in our nation's infrastructure. This fiscal 2018 request fails miserably. At best, it's flat funding for the Corps, but flat funding of an agency that already suffers from delays and uncertainty due to a lack of available resources. For the Corps, less funding means fewer projects are constructed and fewer communities can benefit from the Corps' expertise. For those projects that are constructed, less funding means deferred critical maintenance, and projects must constantly be operated below optimal levels of efficiency. Lack of available funding also means that for many communities, they must pay more or advance their own funding to the Corps in order to move projects forward. And I know that, for example, from my own community that has done that. That is not a sustainable path for addressing our ongoing water resources challenge. We need to do better. First, we need to simply invest more in our domestic infrastructure spending. I suspect if there's not going to be leadership from the President on real federal infrastructure investment, I hope it will be up to the Congress to move forward on real proposals to move this country forward, to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and to put Americans back to work. Also, we need to have a realistic conversation on how to address the backlog of unconstructed projects and deferred maintenance of water resources projects facing our nation. This is a ticking time bomb facing our critical infrastructure and our desire to maintain a highly efficient, protective, and resilient water infrastructure for the next century. We also have to ensure that our federal resources agencies are provided necessary funding to meet their statutory obligations in a timely manner. As the ranking member of this committee, Mr. DeFazio has stated, we cannot streamline our way out of our funding shortfall. I applaud your comments, General Semonite, when you recognize that underfunding your partner agencies only slows down your work when permit reviews go unfunded. Lastly, I'd like to express my disappointment with the Trump administration's efforts to undo the Obama administration's Clean Water Protection Rule. These efforts weaken protection of our nation's rivers, streams, and lakes, place at risk the drinking water supply of over 117 million Americans, and reinstate the regulations that caused the confusion surrounding the scope of the Clean Water Act that existed for close to a decade. For years, the regulations for this rulemaking would rush that this rulemaking would rush to reinstate were uniformly criticized by farmers, industry, and the construction community as arbitrary, as confusing, and as frustrating. I cannot comprehend how putting these regulations back into effect will remove uncertainty. Action also rejects almost a decade of scientific evidence on the importance of rivers, streams, and lakes to human health and the health of the environment, while jeopardizing the drinking water of 1 in 3 Americans. In short, these actions leave us with less protection, more confusion, and increased costs for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing, and I yield back.